them lovely. I know Presbyterians aren't known for their outward expressions of emotion and enthusiasm, but, if your toe wasn't at least tapping a little bit, you need to check your pulse. That was just perfect. Thank you. Hey, I talked about how embarrassment is part of the gospel. Let me tell an embarrassing story on myself. Never told this story. Happened about 10 years ago. I grew up playing basketball. My dad was a coach. Early age, it was part of my life, and got proficient at it. Got pretty good at it at one point. But 10 years ago, it had been a while since I had played. But our church has a basketball court out in the parking lot, and some kids were playing, and I was walking by, and they threw the ball, said, "Hey, take a shot." And I took it, and I flipped the ball around, got my hands on the seam, squared up, got my shoulders, got my elbow in, did all the things, took it, and just perfect this, and it went up in the air, and it came down about 3 feet short of the rim. There's a phrase that you never want to hear when you're playing basketball. And it usually comes when you do that. And it's that phrase, air ball. Now, I've missed many a shot. That wasn't what was so embarrassing about this. What was embarrassing was when it left my hand, I was sure it was going to go in. It felt right. And to feel that good and feel that connected and that much in the flow and then still come up with an air ball. I can't tell you how discouraged and embarrassed I was. This was a total disconnect. A total disconnect from what it felt like in here, what I could conceive and hear, what I remembered, and what actually happened. There was this huge gap. Now, if it was just about basketball, fine. I was in my mid-50s then, and, there aren't too many mid-50 people in the NBA. But I got thinking about that with this week's passage, because that's the phrase that came to me when I read this week's passage. And thinking about if it was just sports, one thing, but it seems to me in my own life there have been too many times airball moments. Airball moments where it felt like I knew what I was supposed to do. I knew what I wanted to do, but the gap between what I thought I should do, knew I should do, and what I actually did and how it came out, it was embarrassing. And I thought about that with this passage, because this passage, inside of it, it talks about things like prayer. And the question is, how do we close the gap between what we know, what we think we know, what we want, what we intend, and what actually happens? So there's one way this sermon could go. This could be one of those sermons where the minister gets up and says, brothers and sisters, we just need to try harder. And we don't go, we need to try harder. And we need to be more committed. And we probably need to be more committed. And if that's not enough, we would say things like, you just need to really, really, really believe this time. Yeah, okay, we do. And if that didn't work, then we would tell more inspiring stories and give inspiring quotes and get ourselves, yes, this time we're going to do it better. We're going to do it differently. And if that doesn't work, we would use guilt and we would use fear. And you've all heard those kind of sermons. I have too. Let's not do that today. Let's not do that for a couple reasons. One, because I think that would be the wrong message for this group. I can't think of any group where that would be needed less than in a group of people who come out on a snowy, cold February morning to come to worship and try to convince people about the need for prayer and for worship and all those things. You're already here. You're already convinced. You already know this. And if you're like most people, including myself, I'd say, of course there's things I can do better. And I don't know anyone who actually prays well, who actually thinks they pray well, and isn't there. So we don't need to even cover that ground. But here's the other part. I don't think that this is the right message for any group. One, because it turns the good news of Jesus into bad news. That the whole point, and now Jesus has come, and now what we have to keep doing is keep trying harder. And just keep trying to believe more and grit our teeth and to do that. The gospel, the good news, has now become bad news. It's all the things that we're not doing, and it's not helpful. Plus, it's not true. So this morning, what I'm going to propose is this. I'm going to propose that rather than beat ourselves up and go down that path that so many times happens, I'm going to propose that we try to rethink one thing, and then we try one thing. The way that we do this gets to what I introduced and talked a little bit about last week, which has to do with the issue of the heart. If you were here last week, you'll want to take out your notes to refer to them. But if you weren't here and you don't have a photographic memory, the heart in the Bible is not that place, just equality equates with thinking, the intellectual versus the emotional. It is, in fact, it is combining. The heart is what combines our best thoughts and the well-regulated heart of emotions. But it also combines and integrates how we make ethical decisions. It is the place of our courage. It is the place of our inspiration. It is the place of imagination. It is the place of generosity. It is the place of overflowing and where we connect socially with one another at our best and where we connect with God. All of that is what the heart does. It integrates that. And when there are disconnects in our life, when we think we know this about God or we think we know this about our faith, and what we actually do, what we are really pointing to is a disconnect in our heart. It is a non-integrated, it is a disconnected, it is a fragmented heart. And there is a gap. And the way that we close that gap requires us to think differently and to try something different. Now, in sports, pretty simple. If I wanted to get proficient or at least decent, you know what we would all do. We'd go back out and we would dribble and we would practice and we'd get our muscles back in sync with our brain and we'd get to know what that feels like. Pretty simple. It turns out that when it comes to the rest of our life, the spiritual part, the intellectual, the emotional, integrating all that, it's not that much different. But the first thing we would have to do is to rethink. We would have to rethink where the gap is and what's going to get us there. There is an old proverb. And the proverb goes something like this, that truth is just a rumor. Truth is just a rumor until it lives in our muscle. Truth is just a rumor until it lives in our muscle. It's just a concept. It's just an idea until it embeds itself with what we do. And it seems to me that is where the gap is for myself, maybe for you. I think for a lot. If I know something, I think I know something, this is what I say I believe, this is what I know to be true, this is how I want to act, this is how I want to react, this is, and there's the gap of what I actually do or don't do. To get to this, I think what we're going to have to do, and this is my suggestion for this morning, is that we need to reconsider the purpose of religion in our lives and how it can contribute. I know, I have just said one of the dirty words in churches. I have just said religion. And if you are like me, it is a little bit like fingernails on a chalkboard when you hear that word. I know. I know people will say whenever I talk about religion, but Russ, it's not about religion, it's about a relationship. Yes, I have said that. I believe that. And I also agree with people who say, listen, I'm not so much religious, I'm spiritual. I get that too. I said that. And what I understand is what people are talking about when they talk about religion, they're talking about a toxic religion, where it is built and based on a set of rules that you have to follow, that is religion, and that it has to do with rule keeping and has to do with believing and embracing doctrines and things that you don't even necessarily know what that means, let alone believe, let alone be able to endorse. and it means obedience, and it means a loyalty to a structure to be honest, some of these structures don't deserve our best loyalty, and they are certainly not obedience. So I get all of that. And if that's what we are saying, that's what religion is, then absolutely, that's toxic. Let's get rid of it. Let's not talk about it. Done. Except there's these passages like this one today. Because what I find when I read this passage, and I have to, if I'm honest, consider it, Jesus was pretty religious. Jesus begins this passage coming out of the synagogue. We are told in other places, as he was accustomed to doing. This is what his normal weekly routine was. He would go to synagogue. He would go for worship and for learning. And then there's this place of prayer. And we are told throughout Scripture, again and again, we find Jesus going off by himself while it's dark, before dawn, to pray. There are 5 classic disciplines, practices that usually revolve around religion, and it has to do with worship, it has to do with prayer, it has to do with service, it has to do with community, it has to do with learning. All 5 of these are embedded in this passage. And Jesus is a fairly religious person from a fairly religious family. So if I'm going to throw religion out, I've got to somehow reconcile, then why was it so important for Jesus? And what does it mean to say, I'm having a relationship with someone who actually is fairly religious? And what does that mean for me? What are we missing when we say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual? It's not about religion, it's about relationship. And I think what we are missing is the place of religion and what it's supposed to do. We have made religion the obstacle, and sometimes it is the obstacle. And when I'm talking about religion now, I'm talking about the habits, the mindsets, the practices that somehow express who we are and connect us to God. And we get in trouble when those become the ends in themselves and not a means to something deeper. We pray because we're supposed to pray, and now we're trying to pray well, or we go to church because you always have to go to church, that's the duty, or you study the Bible because you're supposed to study the Bible, and you're supposed to do all those. They become ends in themselves. They become exercises in trying to become more worthy, acceptable somehow to God. And we talk about doing it right, and we beat ourselves up, and other people will beat us up if we don't do those things and don't do those things well. That's the opposite of what religion is supposed to do. The clue is in the word itself. At its core, the word religion is embedded in the Latin religio. And you break that apart, and it's to re-ligament. Re-ligament. It is reconnecting the various parts of myself, my body, my emotions, my thinking, my ethics, my courage, my creativity. It is those things that help reconnect me to God and to one another. That is what religion at its best is supposed to do. Toxic religion, of course, disconnects us. It disconnects us from one another. It disconnects us from God. It disconnects us even from our own selves. But what Jesus is doing here and what Jesus is modeling is a very different kind. It is those things that we do that help take all aspects into a whole heart and make us able to respond. It's taking the truth out of just being a concept or a rumor, and it's putting it into the muscle of our lives. So it's something that we live. There is this old movie, you may remember it, called Hook. It's a retelling of the Peter Pan story. Robin Williams plays the grown-up Peter Pan. Emma Thompson plays the grown-up Wendy, and they're now married. But there is in this real world that they are now in, there is a disconnect in Peter's life, and he has become a pirate in the sense that he's a corporate raider and he's all involved. And there's this one scene when Emma Thompson is confronting him about the imbalance of his life, the disconnectedness of his life from who he is in his essence and what he is doing. And particularly when it has to do with his family and his children, his whole life. And she says these words, she says, Peter, if you don't pay attention, you're going to miss it. And Peter, you are not paying attention, and you are missing it. When I think of the purpose of religion, at its best, at its core, the kind that Jesus was practicing, it is a way so that we don't miss our life. You can't read this passage without noticing how the things that Jesus was doing were not just off to the side. These were not just the spiritual parts of Jesus, and now here's the rest of it. It's the part that connected all of that together for Jesus, that the miracles that he did and the life that he lived were embedded in the very practices. And so he would have these moments. He was going off to the synagogue, and then he's coming and healing, and then he needs to go off and have prayer so he knows what to do. And it's a part of it. It's inextricably connected. And then it connects to that one verse at the very end where it says, because this is what I came to do. It connects him to his purpose. It connects him to his mission. It connects him so he doesn't miss what he was all about. Jesus understood that there was an appointment on his life and what he was supposed to do. And what he did and found are these things, these practices that helped connect him to that appointment. We have an appointment to our life as well. And there are things that get in the way and disconnect us and distract us from that appointment to our life. The word disappointment literally means we have missed the appointment of what we had hoped and wanted to do and hoped we would do. It is that great disconnect and that gap where the truth of who we are just remains a rumor or a concept or a possibility, and it never finds itself in the muscle of our life. I don't want to die on this hill. I don't want to bleed on this hill of trying to convince people that religion is great, and I'm not going to. It may have collected so much baggage that we just need to set the word aside. But what I do want to bring here, and what I do want to emphasize is, yet there are those things that we would call religious, those habits and those mindsets, those practices that truly can connect us so we don't miss it and that we are connected to it. And so I want us to reconsider and rethink about those things in religion and what that's for. But then I want you to try one thing. Given that there are practices and habits that can make a difference and do make a difference and that have survived the test of thousands of years and that were in fact a part of Jesus' life, maybe to take a look at those. Well, I think for myself, one of the great turning points in my own faith was somehow when it slowly sunk into my dull-wittedness that when we're talking about faith and the practices, it's not about trying really hard or harder. It's about training. It's not about performance, but it is about practicing. I can't tell you how liberating that was, because if you were to throw a basketball to me today and there was a hoop right there, it wouldn't matter how hard I tried. It wouldn't matter how hard I would try to gin up the right amount of energy and grit my teeth, and it'd be an air ball. Because I haven't spent the time training. I haven't spent the time that it takes to connect my thoughts and my body and my muscles and my feel and my touch. I haven't. Now we know this in every other area. We know this in every other. We know it when it comes to, I have a guitar that sits in my study. It's been sitting there dutifully for a long time. I could try to pick it up today, and it wouldn't matter how hard I want to and how much I tried to get enthusiastic about it. I wouldn't be able to do it because my fingers wouldn't do what my mind was telling it to do. It would only be because I need to go back and start to play the scales and coordinate where my fingers hit exactly where they're supposed to hit, where they're supposed to, in order for that to sound good. When it comes to dancing, if you've ever taken a dance class, oh my goodness, you might as well try and stand here and rub your tummy and pat your head. It feels so awkward, and you spend your time going foot here and a foot here and a foot here. And the point is that's not dancing, but it prepares you so that at one point you forget about all that and can dance. But it takes practice for it to be fluid and free. We understand that. We understand that in every aspect of our life. We understand it when somebody says, it takes 10,000 hours to master something. To really be good at something, you got to spend 10,000 hours. We go, yeah, that's about right. The only area where we don't do that is with our faith. We think it's an either all or nothing. I got to try really, 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 really hard to pray well. And if it doesn't work, I guess I'm just not spiritual. The idea of practice, of aligning our best selves. It's not to somehow please God, make ourselves worthy before God. It's not for the thing itself. When we pray, when we come to worship, when we learn, when we serve, when we do it together, we are doing it as a way of opening ourselves up to what God is trying to do. These are the ways that God comes in, traditionally, historically, reliably, and helps make our heart whole so we don't miss the appointment of our life. Not just in the big things, but even more in the little things. Even more when the next time you're at the restaurant and the interaction with the waiter or waitress. Even more when we're standing in line at the store and we're interacting, or somebody wants to interact with us in line. And it's what we say and what we don't say, what we do and we don't do. When we are triggered by those who we love and find ourselves responding in ways that just discourage us. It's just the air balls in our life. That is where this comes into play. Now, I sent some resources in the email, and Justin sent those out. And just because I don't like it when somebody says, oh, go out and try this, and they don't have any suggestions about it. So I've just sent a few suggestions. There's a book that I like about prayer. It's a thin book. There is an app, because sometimes that's how we do things. Wonderful app. And there's an email, a newsletter you can subscribe to. 3 things. Try one of them. Or if you've already got what you like, you've got it. Or you may go there and go, I don't like this. But maybe that'll be the springboard into what you do find. But it's a way of saying, start small and just work on the habit of it. Because habits start to become who you are. If you want to change your life, forget the big pronouncements, forget the grand gestures. If you want to change your life, change your habits. And if you really want to make a difference, focus on the habits that you do every day. And little by little, that becomes a part of who we are. That becomes just as natural a part of who we are as when we say, this is the word of the Lord, and everybody says, thanks be to God. Or when we stand here with one another and somebody says, may the peace of Christ be with you, and we all know, without thinking about it, because it's become a habit, and we say, and also with you. That's the power of a habit. Now, will we fail? Of course we will. There'll be plenty of air balls in our life. But that's the point again, is It's not perfection. It's not performance. The reason they call this practice. And it takes practice. And that means we're going to fail. It means we're going to come up short. And habits don't replace grace. But habits help make grace more than just a word, more than just a rumor, but a way of life. It becomes the way that God helps us take the rumor of grace and what God is doing in our lives and puts it into the muscle. It's how God grows and develops whole hearts and a whole world. Amen?